The year was 1968, and I was in grade 8 in the Hyderabad public school, which means I was 13 years old because I started schooling at the age of 4. I had a very bad attack of jaundice, and then they said to me that I must take absolute rest. I must not move from my bed. That was the treatment at the time. But for a 13-year-old to be told to stay in bed the whole day was neither realistic nor was it going to happen, and it didn't happen with me either. So the result is I had a relapse. And the consequence of that was that I didn't go to school for the whole of that term, all 4 months. Now we had term exam. So my father spoke to the principal of the school, a man by the name of Kuruvilla Jacob, one of my greatest inspirations in life. And Mr. Jacob agreed that if my father could get me to study at home, then I could take the exam. But he warned my father that he said, the chances of him even passing the exam are pretty slim. So why do you want him to do that? My father told him the truth. He said he is the one who wants to do it, which is me. So I studied at home and I took the exam. Now in our days, if you got over 70%, it was called a first class. And if you got over 80%, it was called a distinction. And those who got first class and distinction were called up on stage in the morning assembly, and they were given the first class and distinction cards. It was a little card with your name on it. You were given that card by the principal himself, who shook your hand and presented this to you. So I studied and I took the exam, and I got a first class. I got some, I can't remember exactly, I think 72, 73% or something like that. So I got a first class. And then when I went to school, on the day when the card presentation was happening, I was called up, my name was called up, Yawar Baig, first class. So I walked up to the stage, and as I got onto the stage, Mr. Jacob is standing there with a card in his hand. He shakes my hand, he gives me the card, he shakes my hand, and he said, "What, Yawar? You got tired of getting distinctions, is it?" Now, this is a 13-year-old boy, and I used to get distinctions in all my exams right through school. So there's no exam I did that I didn't get less than 80% in. Now, to modern schooling, especially in India, if you say 80%, some of you listening to this might say, "Oh, so big deal. My son gets 99.89%, and then he is 10th in the class or something." We had a more sane and sensible system of grading. We didn't have this completely. One of the many reasons I am happy that I'm 64 years old and I don't go to school anymore is because I don't have to deal with that kind of a grading system. Anyway, so he says this to me by name. Now, of course, he must have read my name on the card, or he remembered the name, or God knows. But point is that he shakes my hand and he says, "What, Yawar? You got tired of getting distinctions, is it?" Now, I was in the school for the rest of that class, for the rest of that year, and then I was in the school for another until I graduated out in grade 12, 1972, class of 1972. And I never ever got a first class again. I got distinctions throughout. The only first class in my career that I had in school was that time because of my jaundice and relapse. Now, my point is that I'm speaking to you as teachers, as principals, as heads of schools, as head administrators and so on. And I want to talk to you about what is really important in schooling. I think we have got, my opinion about schooling is that by and large, whether it is India, whether it is Nigeria, whether it is the United States, whether it is UK, whether it's Malaysia, whichever country, general schooling, and I'm not saying that there are no exceptions, there are exceptions and all part of the exceptions. But we need to make that exception into the rule. We don't want to be in a situation where the exception proves the rule. And the rule seems to be that our schooling is in a mess. And why do I say that? Because the product of schooling is society. Let me ask you a straightforward question. Are you happy with the kind of society that there is? Whichever country you live in, right? With the exception probably of New Zealand. Whichever country you live in, are you happy with the society that you are in? Again, exceptions prove the rule. We have societies which are filled with hatred, which are filled with discrimination, which are filled with all kinds of cruelty, where there is no compassion, where 8 men, all the people who are so gender sensitive, think about this one, 8 men, their collective wealth, what they own, is more than the collective wealth of 50% of the world's population, 3.5 billion. And I can bet you that since those 8 men are not listening to this one, all the rest of you who are listening to my talk are out of that 3.5 billion or 4 billion. Your collective wealth is less than the wealth of 8 men. Is this something which is satisfactory? Are you happy with that? And if you are not happy with that, and I sincerely hope that you are not just unhappy, I hope that you are literally at your wits' end about this. I hope that you are desperately unhappy. I hope you are very angry about this. Because if you are not, you got to go and check your heart and you must check your mind. But if you are, and I hope you are, then believe me, you as teachers are in the exact correct position where this situation can be changed. Make no mistake, you are in the absolutely right position where this situation can be changed. And what is that situation? The situation is that we can actually have a world where wealth distribution is more logical, more sensible, more equitable. I'm not saying this purely out of any socialist leanings or any communist ideology. I'm saying this for very materialistic, capitalistic reason. And that is that if anybody wants to get wealthy, what do they need? They need a market of people who are capable of buying the product or service that they are selling. If I'm selling iPhones and I want to sell iPhones in a country where people are scrambling to earn $2 a day to support their families, what kind of sales figures do you think I'm going to have? I don't think I need to give any more examples. I'm sure you understand what I'm saying. Poverty is a cancer because it destroys society from inside. Every poor person, no matter how poor he or she is, needs to eat. They need to support their families. They need shelter for themselves and their families. They get sick and they need medical treatment. They need clothing. They need all kinds of benefits, but they cannot pay for them. Please notice, I'm not saying they will not pay for them. I'm saying they cannot pay for them. They would ideally, just ask yourself a very simple question. Go into one of the slums. I'm sure many of you have been there. Go to one of the poor villages in your country, in our country, and since I'm speaking to, I don't know who else in the world, I'm saying your country. Look at some poor person and ask yourself, that person there, does he really not want to own a car? Notice I'm not talking about BMWs and Maseratis and Rolls Royces, and I'm not talking about private planes and yachts. I'm talking about a straightforward car. Does that person not want to own a car or a scooter or motorcycle? Does that person not want to have money, not just to feed themselves, but once in a while to take a few friends out to a restaurant and give them a nice meal? Don't those people want that? So the fact that they don't have that is not because they don't want it. It's because they don't have it, because they can't have it. And why can't they have it? Because we have a system in society that does not take care of those who have less. Now, let me continue with my story. So there was this man, Mr. K. Kuruvilla Jacob, the principal of Hyderabad Public School. And this was my interaction with him. I want to tell you about two more stories of K. Kuruvilla Jacob, and then I want to tell you another story about the man who succeeded him, which was MC Watsa. MC Watsa was the father of Prem Watsa, the Canadian billionaire, who's called the Warren Buffett of Canada. Prem's father was my principal in school. Now, when Mr. Kuruvilla Jacob was principal, this was the period between 1965 and I think it was 1970, because Mr. Watsa came in my last 2 years in school, so that was 70 to 72. So this was 1970. We had a system in school. No, before that. In 68, same year as my earlier story, when I was in grade 8. My class was in a sort of U-shaped building. There were 3 classes in that building, and there was a open courtyard which was paved with Shahabad stone, and on the other end were the toilets. Our school was a boys' school, boys only, no girls. Now it's become HPS is now a co-ed school, but in my time there were no girls. So this was there were the toilets, there were the urinals. Now, boys' school, and this is one of the problems. People used to write all kinds of graffiti, and to put it politely, it wasn't very polite. So this was on the walls. Now one day, just before our tea break, which was around 11 o'clock, 11 or 11:30, I see Mr. Jacob come in and start and walking towards the urinals, walking towards the toilets. Now I must describe Mr. Jacob for you. Mr. Jacob was a tall man. He was from Kerala. He was dark complexioned. He was tall. He was like me, getting bald in the front. And he always wore white. He would wear a white, what today we call safari suit. I mean, those days this thing didn't have a name, but it was a white half-sleeved bush jacket with patch pockets, and white trousers and black shoes. And his shoes were the best shined shoes that I have ever seen in my life. So there is a reason I'm describing this appearance to you, because of what I'm about to say. So I see this just before our bell rang for our interval. I see Mr. Jacob walking into the toilets. And behold, Mr. Jacob is carrying a bucket in which I can see a broom and a brush sticking out. So I uh, dug my elbow into my classmate's, seatmate's ribs, and I pointed to him. I said, "Look there." And he looked at it. He said, "What the hell is he doing?" And then the bell rang. And when the bell rang, all of us boys, we trooped out. We all gathered in front of the toilet. And what do we see? We see Mr. Jacob cleaning the graffiti on the walls. So he throws water, he throws cleaner, he takes the brush, he rubs all that, he throws some water again. And then all the graffiti on the walls is cleaned. There's water on the floor, there's water on his shoes. And then he takes the broom and he sweeps it all into the drain. He finishes that, he puts the broom and the bucket and the brush back in his bucket. He picks up his bucket, he comes out of the toilet, and all of us are standing there looking at him. He smiles at us and he walks away. Not one word. The man did not speak one word. He didn't, for example, say, what kind of, upbringing do people have? What kind of homes do you come from? Why do you write this stuff on these walls? You should be ashamed of yourself. You come to a great school like this, which is in those days it was one of 6 schools in the whole country. But you don't have, you have these kinds of manners. You are nothing. The man did not say one single word. He just picked up his bucket and he smiled at us. Remember, he didn't ignore us. He didn't frown at us. He didn't scowl at us. He smiled at us and he walked away. And this was in grade 8. I was in that school for another 4 years. I never ever saw any graffiti on any toilet wall in that school. Now remember, that toilet was not the only toilet in the school, because the school was sprawled totally. We had 100 acres of land, so we had a lot of land. The school was in several buildings. Every building had its own toilets, and because there were the classes there and so on. And Mr. Jacob didn't go around cleaning all the toilets in the school. Why he picked our toilet, I don't know. Maybe we were the most poetic or something. I have no idea. But why he picked that, or maybe it was closest to his office, I have no idea. But anyway, the point being that I was eyewitness to this thing. And I can tell you that for the next 4 years, no one ever wrote anything on those walls. And I'm saying 4 years because I left the school after that. I don't know what happens. Third story about Mr. K. Kuruvilla Jacob. We had a system or a custom in the school in those days that one afternoon per term, each class would have lunch with the principal in the principal's bungalow. The principal's bungalow was a sprawling colonial-style bungalow. It had a big lawn in front, and then after the lawn was an orchard of fruit trees. On the side was a vegetable garden. The principal lived in great style. So one class, and our classes were never more than 30 people. So the 30 boys who had lunch with the principal, I think it was they were probably trying to put some good manners into us. So one class had lunch with the principal every term. Now that day it was my class's turn. So we all lunchtime normally we had lunch in the school dining hall. It's a very imposing, beautiful building. So this time we went to the principal's house. Food used to be very, very good. So we look forward to that. It so happened on that day, Mr. Jacob was late. He didn't come. Usually he would be there to welcome us, but that day he wasn't. And Mrs. Jacob was a very intelligent lady. She didn't want 30 boys to be wandering around in her house before her husband turned up. So she told us, hang around outside. So we were all sprawled on the lawn. It was a big lawn. It was a nice afternoon. So we were all on the lawn. And then I noticed there were some guava trees in the orchard. So 2 of my friends and myself, 3 of us, We went into the orchard, and each of us was on top of one tree, and we were plucking guavas. And as we were doing that, we hear this deep voice: "Boys, come for lunch." Believe me, I almost dropped out of that tree like a guava. Because here I was stealing guavas in the principal's house, caught by the principal. I'm saying caught because obviously there was no way he would have missed seeing us. And this is where you realize who your friends were, because obviously he walked past them and not one of them warned us that he's coming. They would have seen him coming, they didn't say anything. They let us be caught, and this is the value of friends. But anyway, I got out of the tree, we came there, and as we walked up to him, we see him standing there. The veranda, the school, the houses had a long veranda all along, and there were three small steps. You climbed them to the veranda, and then you went into the main drawing room of the house. On the left was the dining room. So there he was standing on top of the steps. On either side of him were two big baskets. With what, guess? Filled with ripe guavas. So the boys were all waiting, and I was the first one. I had this, for some funny reason, I was the leader for all the wrong reasons. Anyway, so I went up, and Mr. Jacob says to me, have a guava, take a guava. Now, all sorts of stuff is running through my head. I'm thinking that I'm going to get reported to my father for my behavior, and when I go home today is the last day of my life. My father is going to slaughter me, and I'm going to be chucked out of school, and God knows what's going to happen. And if you've seen Calvin cartoons, that was me. It was Calvin working in my head. In those days, of course, I didn't know about Calvin. But there's this principle. The man is saying, "Please have a guava." So I picked up one. He said, "Take one more." So I picked up another one. And he says to me, "That's better than climbing trees and eating raw guavas, right?" I mean, I would have agreed to anything he was saying at the time, believe me. But that's it. He didn't say, "Why did you climb my tree?" No. Have a guava. Have another guava. That's it. 1968. Today we are sitting in 2020. This happened in Hyderabad. I'm sitting here in America. You don't even know how many times I have told this story. In how many countries, to how many people. That is the power of inspiration of a teacher, right? And that is my message to you. As I told you, the world is beset with toxicity. The world is beset with hatred. The world is beset with negativity of every kind. The world is also beset. Today is my bad hair day, as you can see, but doesn't matter. Don't worry about that. I'm beyond the time where I care about my hair. Today the world is beset with these things, and believe me, guess who has the maximum power to change that? You. Teachers. Your impact, you don't even know. Both negative and positive. Mr. Kuruvilla Jacob has been dead now a couple of decades. But I will take those memories to my grave whenever that time comes. Which brings me to my second story of Mr. Watsa, MC Watsa. I was in grade 10, and I was debating whether I wanted to do ISC. In those days we had Cambridge certification, so I was debating whether I should do ISC or whether I should do metric and do PUC, the 2-year pre-university course. because I was in a dilemma whether I wanted to do medicine or not. So uh, my father was a doctor. He was absolutely focused on the fact that he wanted me to be a doctor. And at that time, I was absolutely focused on the fact that I did not want to be a doctor. Today, if you ask me, why did you not want to be a doctor? The only answer I can give you, the honest answer I can give you, is because my father wanted me to be a doctor, and he was so, you know, dominating about that. Those of you who are parents and who have aspirations and ambitions for your children, you might like to think about that. That your dominance about the aspiration can become the only reason why your child will not achieve that. So think about that. I don't have any regrets in my life. I think I've done very well for myself and I'm very happy with what I'm doing. But if anyone ever asked me and said, if you could have a change in career, what would you like to be? Today I can say I would like to be a doctor. But I'm too old for that now. So, anyway, the point is that I was going through this kind of a thing. Now, I don't know how this got to my principal. Maybe my class teacher, Mr. Sambasiva Rao, was responsible for that. Maybe he told my principal that. I don't know what happened. Anyway, the long and short of it is I was called to the principal's office. Now, when you are in school, being called to the principal's office is always invariably bad news. I mean, you had to have done something very seriously wrong to be called to the principal's office. You didn't get called to the principal's office for nothing. So here I was called to the principal's office. So I landed there. Mr. Watsa meets me, shakes my hand, and he says, yeah, well, have a seat. So I sat down. He says to me, he said, if you are walking down a street in the night which is badly lit, the lighting is bad, and down that street in the distance there is a light, electric pole, there's one little light on that pole. And as you walk on down that street, you see a ghost. You see this dark shape and it's moving, and you get terrified. And you want to turn around and run. He said that would be the natural reaction, to turn around and run. Then he said, but you don't do that. You continue to walk down the street. And guess what? When you get to that ghost, you know what that ghost is? That ghost is the branch of a tree on which somebody put a piece of cloth, or maybe it's a kite or something, and it's that light from that lamppost which is throwing a shadow of this combination of this tree branch and the stuff on it, which makes it look like a ghost. It's nothing to be frightened of. It's a tree branch. He says, today you are in a dilemma. You may be feeling you're not feeling too confident about your life going forward and so on. He said, think about this. Think about this. Right? Thank you for coming. That's it. MC Watsa. I don't know whether Prem Watsa ever had this conversation with his dad. Maybe he did, because that he didn't. I can see he did quite well for himself. But his father, this is what he said to me. And once again, a memory I take with me in life. That courage is to face the ghosts. It's not to run away. Courage is to face the ghosts. Courage is to look at the ghost straight in the eye and continue to walk towards it until you discover that it's not a ghost at all. It's a tree branch.